The oppressive gray sky of a late August afternoon pressed down on Allegheny Springs, Pennsylvania, the humidity so thick you could wear it like a wet coat. Here at the Intercity Bus Terminal, a place of pitted concrete and functional, rust-stained steel, the air was stagnant and heavy. A few large, industrial fans mounted high on the walls of the outdoor waiting area groaned with a weary rhythm, pushing the hot air around instead of cooling it. Most passengers huddled in the strips of shade, fanning themselves with magazines or slouched in the tired stillness that only suffocating humidity can bring. Tucked away on a steel bench, slightly apart from the dozen or so other travelers, sat Jack Corbin. To a casual observer, he was utterly unremarkable, which was exactly how he preferred it. A man in his mid-30s, his lean, toned frame gave no hint of the coiled strength beneath his simple gray t-shirt and worn jeans. His hair was cut short and neat, and his eyes, a calm, steady blue, scanned the area without appearing to watch. He looked like any other traveler, maybe a steel worker or a carpenter heading home. In reality, he was waiting for the 4:15 p.m. bus north to Cleveland, the last leg of a long journey home from a place not found on any map. He was in that strange, jarring phase of decompression, where the hypervigilance of his job clashed with the slow, mundane rhythm of the civilian world. His job, which he never discussed, was that of a Navy SEAL. But here, he was just Jack, a man trying to quiet the noise in his head. He shifted on the hard bench, the humidity making his shirt stick to his back, and let his gaze drift, practicing the art of simply existing. His attention eventually settled on a scene near the edge of the platform, close to a large, wilting planter of geraniums. An elderly woman sat in a manual wheelchair, positioned to catch what little breeze the fans generated. She was Eleanor Vance, though Jack didn't know her name. She was likely in her late 70s, as small and delicate as a bird, yet possessed an undeniable dignity. Her silver hair was pinned in a neat bun, and despite the heat, she wore a light blue cardigan over a simple floral dress. Her eyes, behind thin glasses, were bright and sharp, taking in the station's activity with the quiet interest of someone who had seen it all before. Beside her wheelchair, lying with the lazy patience of old age, was a German Shepherd. The dog was magnificent, though past his prime. His muzzle was dusted with gray, and his hips seemed a little stiff as he shifted, but his body was positioned as a loyal, living barrier between Eleanor and the rest of the world. A brass tag on his thick leather collar read, Max. Jack, a student of patterns, had been watching them for several minutes. They clearly had a pattern. They didn't seem to be anxiously awaiting a bus. They just seemed to be. It was a routine, Jack realized. This was their afternoon outing. Eleanor would occasionally lean down, her hands thin and spotted with age, and whisper something too low for him to hear. The dog, Max, would lift his heavy head, his tail giving a single, thumping wag against the hot concrete, and he'd nudge her hand. She would scratch the exact right spot behind his ears, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. Jack recognized the bond instantly. It was pure, uncomplicated, a silent contract of mutual protection and affection. It was the kind of thing he rarely saw. In his world, dogs were tools, partners, weapons. But this was different. This was family. He found the silent interaction calming. It centered him. It reminded him that not everything in the world was noise and conflict. He watched as Eleanor reached into a small canvas bag hanging from her wheelchair's armrest. She produced a small biscuit, regarded it with a serious expression, and then deliberately broke it in two. She offered one half to Max, who took it from her fingers with the practiced, gentle mouth of a veteran. She carefully wrapped the other half in a napkin and placed it back in the bag for later, a shared ritual. The station announcer's voice crackled over the PA system, distorted and tinny, announcing a 20-minute delay for the northbound bus to Cleveland. Jack sighed internally, more waiting, more sitting in the thick soup of the Pennsylvania heat. A young couple nearby was bickering in low tones about luggage. A sweaty toddler started to whine for ice cream. It was all perfectly, painfully normal. Jack closed his eyes for just a second, letting the ambient sounds wash over him, trying to force his internal threat level dial from red down to green. He was practicing being still, a skill he found much harder than a 5-mile run or staying awake for 72 hours. He was just beginning to relax, just starting to feel his edges soften, when a new sound cut through the lazy afternoon. It wasn't the distant rumble of a bus or the whine of the child. It was the sharp, angry slap of hard-soled shoes moving too fast on pavement. Jack's eyes snapped open. The man who had just stormed into the waiting area was the complete opposite of the afternoon's languor. This was Kyle Baxter. He was in his late 20s, dressed in expensive clothes, a pressed dress shirt and slacks, that looked slept in and rumpled. His dark, slicked back hair was damp, plastered to his forehead with sweat, or perhaps anxiety. His face was flushed a blotchy, unhealthy red that suggested high blood pressure and a dangerous temper. He carried no luggage, only a thin leather briefcase clutched in one white-knuckled hand. He wasn't a traveler. He was a problem. Jack didn't just see a man. His training forced him to analyze. Subject is agitated, sweating heavily in 90-degree heat. But it's the cold, clammy sweat of desperation. Eyes wide, darting, pupils a little dilated. He's running on adrenaline and something else. Pure desperation. Kyle ignored the ticket counters, ignored the other passengers who glanced at his chaotic arrival. His path was a straight line to one target. The old woman in the wheelchair. Max sensed him first. The old dog's head came up, and a low, uncertain rumble started deep in his chest. It wasn't the protective bark of a watchdog, but the anxious sound of an animal recognizing a familiar, unwelcome presence. Max pushed himself up on his stiff legs, planting himself more firmly in front of the wheelchair, his gray muzzle wrinkled. "Oh, shut up, you stupid thing," Kyle snapped, not breaking stride. His voice was high, thin. Eleanor looked up, and Jack watched her composure instantly dissolve, replaced by a look of weary, soul-deep frustration and disappointment. It was a look that said, "Not here, not again." "Kyle," she said, her voice thin but even. "What are you doing here? I told you we would talk later." "I don't have time for later, and Eleanor," Kyle cut in, his voice a harsh, sibilant whisper that cut through the air. He was already fumbling with the clasp on his briefcase, his hands shaking. "We need to get this done now." He pulled out a sheaf of papers and a cheap plastic pen, thrusting them onto the small tray attached to her wheelchair. "You just need to sign here and here." Eleanor Vance recoiled as if the papers were venomous. "Kyle, we discussed this. I told you my lawyer has to look at everything." "Forget your lawyer," he hissed, leaning in, invading her space. The sour smell of old liquor and cigarettes wafted off him. "He's not the one who needs this." "I do." "Sign the papers, old woman." Across the platform, Jack Corbin sat perfectly still. The noise of the bickering couple, the whining child, the station announcer. It all faded into a low, steady roar. The world had shrunk to the 20 yards between his bench and the old woman. His body remained relaxed, non-threatening, but his mind was crystal clear. Man is aggressive and unstable. Woman is vulnerable, a physical hard target and an emotional soft one. The dog was the only line of defense. And he was old. Jack's decompression was over. His internal dial hadn't just switched back to red. It had blown past it. He didn't move. He didn't stand. He didn't reach for a weapon he wasn't carrying. He just watched. He analyzed. He waited for the man's next move because Jack knew with the cold, absolute certainty of his profession that this situation was balanced on a knife's edge. And the man named Kyle had no idea what was sitting on the bench directly opposite him. Eleanor Vance's hands, thin but steady, gripped the arms of her wheelchair. She didn't shrink from the papers Kyle had shoved at her. She looked past them, into his face. "Kyle," she said, her voice retaining a surprising strength. "I told you at the house, I will not sign anything, absolutely nothing, until my attorney, Mr. Gable, has reviewed it." Her words were precise, measured, a stark contrast to his sloppy desperation. Kyle made a sound, a noise of frustration that was almost a sob. He shot a panicked look over his shoulder, as if the other passengers were judging him. Most were trying not to. The young couple who had been arguing over luggage had fallen silent. The woman was now staring intently at her phone. The man was suddenly fascinated by a loose tile on the station floor. A new figure, a businessman in a rumpled gray suit, tie loosened against the heat, his face a mask of commuter's annoyance, glanced at the unfolding scene with irritation. He looked at Kyle, then at Eleanor, rolled his eyes as if to say, "Just what I needed," and turned away, making a deliberate show of checking the time on his watch. He was a man named Mr. Davis, and he was a firm believer in minding his own business, especially when family squabbles erupted in public. He just wished they'd be quiet about it. Kyle turned back to Eleanor, his voice dropping to a venomous, conspiratorial whisper. "We don't have time for Gable. Don't you get it? This isn't a parking ticket." He tapped the papers, his trembling finger leaving a damp smudge on the first page. "This is a simple thing, it's an advance, a technicality. It just moves things around, that's all. It's my money anyway. Eventually." "It is not your money," Eleanor replied. And the chill in her voice made even Jack Corbin raise an eyebrow. This wasn't just a scared old woman. She had a spine of steel. "It's the money your grandfather and I saved for 50 years. The money I promised him I would protect. The money you are not going to gamble away, Kyle. Not one more cent. The word gamble hung in the humid air. Kyle flinched as if he'd been struck. You don't know what you're talking about, he whispered, but the denial was pathetic. It was a bad beat. I can get it back. I just need. No, she said. It was a single, clean word. Final. Across the platform, Jack Corbin watched the businessman, Mr. Davis, sigh audibly and move to a bench farther away from the confrontation. Jack's eyes shifted back to Kyle. The man's entire body was vibrating, a spring wound too tight. Jack's training was screaming at him, but his discipline held him. It was still just a verbal altercation. To intervene now, without a badge, could make him the aggressor in the eyes of the law. He had to wait for the line. The line between civil disorder and a physical assault. He hated waiting for the line. Kyle's face, which had been flushed, was now turning a pale, waxy yellow. Desperation was being replaced by something else, something colder. Panic. You don't understand, he said, his voice cracking. These aren't the kind of people you reason with. This isn't the bank, and Eleanor. They don't send polite letters. He was leaning so close that Eleanor had to turn her head away from his sour breath. They're ruthless. Do you hear me? Ruthless. They said. They said they'd break my hands. He held up his own trembling hands as if to show her. And that's just for starters. All for a stupid bet. I just pay them and they go away. $4,000. It's nothing to you. It's not nothing when it's the last thing I have, Eleanor said quietly, though her own hands were now trembling in her lap. I gave you money last Christmas, Kyle. For the rent? I gave you money and made to fix your car. This has to stop. It has to. I'm going to die, Kyle whispered, his eyes wide and vacant. They're going to find me, and I'm going to die, and it's going to be your fault. Your fault. He wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. His voice rose, cracking with hysteria. The young couple was now openly staring. The businessman, Davis, looked up, muttered something under his breath about trash, and started walking towards the indoor waiting area. He wanted no part of this. My fault? Eleanor asked, her own anger finally rising. After everything we did for you, after what you put your mother through? How dare you? That was what broke him. It wasn't the denial of money. It was the accusation. His last shred of dignity, however false, had been challenged. His desperation and shame and fear erupted in a single, violent impulse. You made me. He shrieked. The words echoed across the platform, raw and ugly. Before Jack could even tense, before the young couple could gasp, Kyle acted. He didn't just push the wheelchair. He grabbed the handle on one side and the armrest on the other, planting his foot for leverage. With one angry, guttural heave, he flipped the wheelchair on its side. It happened in sickening slow motion. The screech of metal grinding on concrete, a sharp metallic shriek. Eleanor Jackson cried out, a thin, terrified sound as she was thrown from the machine that held her. She landed hard on the unforgiving pavement, her small body crumpling with a pained grunt, her glasses flying off and skittering across the ground. For a second, the entire platform froze. The whining child fell silent. The fans groaned, then chaos. Max, who had been growling with uncertainty, exploded into action. The loyalty of his breed overrode the stiffness of his old bones. With a deep, protective roar, the German shepherd launched himself not at Kyle's throat, but at his arm, the arm that had hurt his mistress. The dog's teeth clamped down on the dress shirt, tearing the fabric, trying to drag the thread away from Eleanor. Kyle screamed, this time in surprise and pain. He stumbled back, shaking his arm violently to get the dog to let go. Get off. But his panic was instantly replaced by a blind, vicious rage. The dog was between him and his escape. The dog was just another obstacle. As Max launched himself again, putting everything he had into his old hips to defend Eleanor's prone form, Kyle brought his expensive, hard-soled shoe up. He didn't hesitate. He kicked the dog. A full force, driving kick aimed squarely at the animal's ribcage. The sound wasn't a scrape, but a deep, sickening thump. Max yelped, a high-pitched sound of pure agony, nothing like his warning growl. He collapsed to the pavement, the wind knocked out of him, his legs scrabbling, trying to get up, but the pain was too much. No. Eleanor cried from the ground, trying to push herself up on one elbow. Max. Oh, please. Kyle was panting like a bellows, his face a mask of sweat and fury. He looked down at the whimpering dog, then at Eleanor. He took a step toward Max, raising his foot again. You watch, he snarled, his voice trembling with a terrible, ecstatic power. He wanted her to see. He wanted her to feel his desperation. You watch your stupid, useless dog. You see? This is your fault. Look what you're making me do. He kicked the dog again, a glancing, malicious blow. Across the platform, Jack Corbin stood up. The line had been crossed. The word "do" was still hanging in the humid air. Kyle's foot was already raised for the second, vicious kick, and Eleanor was still sobbing, "No." From the pavement. Jack Corbin, 20 yards away, was already moving. He didn't yell, "Hey!" or "Stop." Yelling was a warning. It gave an adversary time to reevaluate, to change targets, to draw a weapon. Yelling was for civilians. Jack didn't run. Running was a clumsy, bouncing gait, telegraphing panic and inefficient for closing distance. Jack moved. To the young couple, Jenna and Chris, who were frozen in horror near the station doors, it was a physical impossibility. 1 second, the quiet man in the gray t-shirt was standing by his bench. The next, he was in the middle of the platform, having covered 60 feet of tile in a way that seemed to defy friction. He was a blur, a predator closing in a silent rush. His footfalls were silent, his face was utterly calm, his eyes locked on the target. Kyle never saw him coming. He was lost in his own red mist, his world shrunk to the cowering dog and the woman he blamed. He was balanced on one leg, his body coiled to deliver the kick. That's when Jack arrived. He didn't grab Kyle's leg. He didn't throw a punch. His action was precise, economical, and devastating. Jack's left hand shot out, but it wasn't aimed at the leg. It reached out and clamped onto Kyle's right wrist with the force of a steel trap. Simultaneously, Jack's right hand, fingers extended into a rigid blade, struck a point on the side of Kyle's neck, the brachial plexus, where a bundle of nerves emerges. It wasn't a chop so much as a press, a deliberate, violent short circuit of the man's entire nervous system. The effect was immediate and total. The command from Kyle's brain to his leg simply vanished. A bolt of cold, searing fire shot from his wrist to his shoulder while the right side of his body went temporarily numb. The kick he was about to deliver dissolved into a twitch. His balance, already precarious, was gone. His knees buckled, not because he chose them to, but because his body refused to hold him up anymore. He collapsed, folding onto the hard concrete, landing heavily on his knees with a choked, gasping grunt. The leather briefcase flew from his other hand, skittering across the pavement and spilling its uselessly important papers. The entire platform had gone from chaotic to utterly silent in less than 3 seconds. The only sounds were the groan of the overhead fans, the distant, tinny announcement of the delayed bus, and the high, pained whimper of Max, who was still trying to drag himself toward Eleanor. Kyle was on his knees, his face a mask of profound shock and confusion, his body unable to obey commands. He was trying to breathe, but his lungs felt frozen. Jack Corbin stood over him, not even breathing hard. He still held Kyle's right wrist, applying just enough pressure to keep the joint locked and the pain signaling. He wasn't looking at Kyle, but past him. A young man in an ill-fitting transit uniform, his name tag reading Leo, was peering out from the indoor ticket office, his eyes wide as saucers. Leo was maybe 20, pale and clearly terrified, wondering if this was a robbery or something worse. Jack's voice cut through the silence. It wasn't a shout. It was a calm, clear, and absolute command that echoed across the platform. "You in the uniform," Leo started, pointing at himself. "Get on your radio and call 911, Jack ordered, his voice flat. "Tell the Allegheny Springs PD there's been a public assault and battery on an elderly individual. Tell them to send an ambulance. Then, you're going to call animal control. The animal is injured." Leo just stared, stunned. "Did you hear me?" Jack's voice didn't get louder. It got sharper. "Police. Ambulance. Animal control. Now." Leo vanished from the doorway, his fumbling hands already reaching for the radio on his shoulder. The young couple, Jenna and Chris, were still plastered against the wall, phones in hand, though neither was recording. "You too," Jack said, nodding at them. Chris, in the baseball cap, just nodded dumbly. Jack looked down at Kyle, who was now just a whimpering, defeated heap. Jack had assessed the threat. It was over. Kyle was a coward, all his bluster gone, replaced by the reality of his actions. Jack gave the wrist one final, sharp tug, forcing another gasp from Kyle before shoving him forward, face down. Kyle cried out as his chin hit the tile. "Stay there," Jack said. It wasn't a request. He placed a foot lightly on Kyle's back just to remind him before stepping over him. He crossed the last few feet to Eleanor Vance in 2 strides. He knelt beside her, immediately placing his body between her and the pathetic spectacle of her nephew. He was blocking her view of Kyle and Kyle's view of her. He touched her shoulder gently. "Ma'am." Eleanor was curled up, her cardigan torn at the elbow, her breathing shallow and horrified. She was staring at Max. "My dog," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He hurt my dog." "I know," Jack said, his voice softening, a tone he rarely used. A tone reserved for things that weren't broken, just badly damaged. His hands, which had just disabled a man, now moved with surprising gentleness. He did a quick sweep for injuries: head, neck, arms. He saw the scrapes on her palms and elbow, but nothing that seemed immediately life-threatening. "Are you hurt anywhere else, ma'am? Can you feel this?" he asked, gently touching her leg. She nodded, still crying. "My hip, it hurts, but Max." Jack looked at the dog. Max was lying on his side, his breathing shallow, his tail giving one pained, weak thump at the sound of Eleanor's voice. Jack slipped a hand under the dog's head, the other resting on his ribs, feeling the damage. "He's alive," Jack said, his voice firm, trying to will strength into her. "He's hurt, but he's alive. We have help coming for both of you." He looked back at Eleanor, his blue eyes locking onto her terrified, tear-filled ones. "My name is Jack. You're safe now. It's over." The sound of sirens, faint at first, quickly grew into a piercing wail that sliced through the humid afternoon. It was the sound Jack Corbin had been waiting for, the sound that signaled the transfer of responsibility. He still had his foot planted firmly on the small of Kyle's back, who had stopped whimpering and was now just lying face down on the tile floor, breathing in humiliated gasps. The other passengers had formed a loose, morbid semicircle, their phones all raised now, recording the anticlimactic end. First through the doors were the paramedics, a young woman, Jenna, with a calm face and efficient movements, and her partner. They bypassed the subdued suspect and went straight to Jack, who was still kneeling beside Eleanor. "Sir, we'll take it from here," Jenna said, her voice professional as she and her partner knelt, their bags opening with practice clicks. Jack nodded, backing away just enough to give them room, but he didn't go far. He stood next to the overturned wheelchair, righting it. Eleanor was shaking her head. "My dog, please. My dog," she whispered, her eyes fixed on Max, who was still on his side, his breathing shallow and rapid. Two Allegheny Springs police cruisers skidded to a stop, lights flashing, and a moment later the white van of animal control pulled in behind them. The platform was suddenly very crowded. The officer in charge, a man in his mid-40s with a uniform looking tired and damp from the heat and a name tag that read Riley, surveyed the scene with a resigned sigh. Sergeant Riley was a 20-year veteran of the city's streets, and he hated domestic disputes. "All right, what have we got here?" he asked, his voice a gravelly monotone. The young transit employee, Leo, practically ran to him. "Sir, that man." He pointed at Kyle. "He attacked her. He flipped her wheelchair and he kicked her dog." The young couple, Jenna and Chris, chimed in. "We saw it. We have it on video. He kicked that poor dog twice." Sergeant Riley nodded slowly, his eyes finding Jack, who was standing quietly by the righted wheelchair. Riley's gaze lingered, recognizing the latent efficiency in Jack's posture. This wasn't just another passenger. Riley walked over to Kyle and nudged him with his boot. "On your feet, hands behind your back." Kyle, his face smeared with sweat and grime, offered no resistance. He was cuffed, his earlier fury completely gone, replaced by a sullen, terrified silence. As he was being led away, he finally found his voice again, but it was a whine. "You don't understand. You need to call my father. His name is Baxter. You call him, he'll sort this out." Riley and his younger partner exchanged a look. It was a look Jack saw and understood instantly. It was a look of profound weariness, the look of men who knew their adrenaline rush was about to get buried in paperwork and politics. Yeah, Mr. Baxter," Riley's partner muttered, pushing Kyle towards the cruiser. "We'll get right on that." Meanwhile, the paramedics were trying to assess Eleanor. "Ma'am, your blood pressure is very high," Jenna said, undoing the cuff. "You've got abrasions on your hands and elbow, and you took a hard fall on your hip. We really need to take you in. Get you checked out." "No," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'm not leaving him." She was pointing at Max. A second uniformed figure, the animal control officer, had arrived. She was a woman named Marta, with kind eyes and gentle hands. She was already kneeling beside Max, her small kit open. "He's in shock," Marta said quietly to Jack, who was observing her work. His breathing is shallow, and he's guarding his ribs. I'd bet he has a couple of fractures. He needs an X-ray right now. She gently fitted a muzzle on him, not because he was aggressive, but to protect him from biting out of pain, and expertly maneuvered a small stretcher beneath him. Eleanor, Marta called softly. We're taking Max to the Coastal Emergency Vet Clinic on the south side. He's in good hands. Eleanor, now sitting on a paramedic's gurney wrapped in a shock blanket, looked panicked. I can't. I have to go with him. Ma'am, Jenna, the paramedic, insisted, our priority is you. The police need your statement, and we need to get you to the hospital. No. Eleanor's voice was sharp. I won't go. I won't. I'll sign the papers. She was pointing at the refusal of care form on the paramedic's clipboard. Jack watched the scene, his mind processing. He saw the police taking statements from the couple. He saw Sergeant Riley walking towards him, notebook in hand. He heard the station PA make a final boarding call for the 4:15 bus to Cleveland, his bus. Riley stopped in front of him. And you? You're the one who took him down. Jack Corbin, Jack said, his voice low and even. Passenger, I witnessed the assault. I subdued the suspect until you arrived. Riley looked him over, probing. Corbin, you military? I was, Jack lied. A simple, harmless lie he often used. Army, a long time ago. Right, Riley said, skeptical, but too tired to press. Well, long time ago or not, you saved us some trouble. He's yours, he gestured to Kyle, who was now in the back of the cruiser. But between you and me, he's a Baxter. He'll be out on bail before my shift ends. Riley closed his notebook. We're done here. Jack watched him walk away. He'll be out on bail before my shift ends. The bus to Cleveland hissed a final metallic sigh. The doors were closing. Eleanor was now alone, a small, trembling figure on the gurney, watching the animal control van prepare to leave. She was trying to get off the gurney, but her legs were shaky. I'll call a cab, she was whispering to herself, fumbling for the purse that was still in her overturned chair. I need. She was about to be left alone, injured, with her only companion in an animal hospital and her attacker about to be released. Jack Corbin made a decision. He walked past the departing police cars, past the staring passengers, and past his own bus, which was now beginning to pull out of the station. He walked over to Eleanor and the paramedic. I'll take you, ma'am, he said. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion and tears. My bus, Jack lied again. It got cancelled. Looks like I'm stuck in Allegheny Springs. I'll take you to the vet clinic. An hour later, they were in the sterile, silent waiting room of the Coastal Emergency Vet Clinic. It smelled of bleach and quiet panic. Jack had used a rideshare app to get them there. Following the van, Eleanor sat in a borrowed wheelchair, a paper cup of water in her trembling hands. Jack sat opposite her, just waiting. He said nothing, just offered a steady, quiet presence. Finally, a veterinarian in blue scrubs came through the doors. Ms. Vance. Well, Max is stable, but you were right to be worried. He has 3 fractured ribs, and one of them punctured his lung. He's going to need surgery to place a chest tube, and he'll have to stay with us for a few days. Eleanor crumbled. Her last reserve of fortitude broke, and she began to sob, not loudly, but with the deep, hopeless grief of someone who has just lost her last line of defense. She was alone. Her dog was in surgery, and she knew with a terrible certainty that Kyle would be back. Jack let her cry for a moment, then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Ms. Vance. She looked up, her face a mess of tears. Eleanor, she whispered. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor, Jack repeated, his voice low and steady, a grounding force in the sterile room. I'm going to get my bag from the station. I'm canceling my ticket. She just stared at him, uncomprehending. I'm finding a hotel near here. I'm staying in Allegheny Springs until I know for certain that you and Max are safe. That man will not come near either of you again. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a polite offer. It was a statement of fact. The mission had just been extended. Jack Corbin woke at 0500. It was a rhythm his body refused to break regardless of time zone or emotional exhaustion. His hotel room, a sterile, anonymous box near the vet clinic, was dark, the only light coming from a crack in the curtains, revealing a pre-dawn Allegheny Springs sky already a heavy, pearlescent gray. He'd spent the night in the chair, not the bed, existing in a state of hyper-aware, low-level sleep that was more observation than rest. The promise he'd made to Eleanor Vance had changed his status. He was no longer a traveler waiting for a bus. He was an operator on a self-assigned mission, and Allegheny Springs was now officially a hostile environment. He opened his laptop, a rugged, nondescript machine with a non-reflective screen, and got to work. The first confirmation was easy. He navigated the Chatham County Public Database with practiced, economical clicks. Kyle Baxter, arrested 30 hours. Charges: third-degree assault, elderly person, cruelty to animals. Status: released on bail 15 hours. Less than 6 hours. Sergeant Riley had been exactly right. That speed was insulting. It was a message. Now for the why. Jack typed Baxter and Allegheny Springs into a search protocol deeper than a simple web search. The results were immediate and overwhelming. The Baxter family wasn't just wealthy. They were Allegheny Springs. They were legacy. He saw Baxter Industrial Holdings. The Croft Historical Preservation Fund. Photos of Allegheny Springs society at galas standing next to mayors and senators. And at the center of most, a man named Augustus Baxter, Kyle's father. Augustus was in his late 60s with a face that looked carved from hardwood, a perfectly tailored suit, and eyes that held zero warmth. He was a patriarch from an older, colder era, a man who clearly valued two things: legacy and control. Jack dug deeper, cross-referencing names, looking for the weak link. He found Kyle. Kyle wasn't in the business photos. He wasn't on the foundation's board. He only showed up on society pages from years ago. Always on the arm of a different board-looking debutante. Then, Jack found the Digital Whispers. A minor DUI in Pittsburgh. Charges dismissed. A vandalism charge in Cleveland that had been settled out of court. A report from a regional casino, a known hotspot for illegal activity, mentioning a Mr. K. Baxter, who had been forcibly removed by security 2 years prior. The pattern was clear. Kyle was the black sheep. He was the family's gas leak, the constant problem that was quietly fixed by lawyers and backroom calls to protect the family name. The desperation Jack had seen on the platform now made perfect sense. Kyle had been cut off financially. The frayed clothes and sheer panic proved that. But he was still being insulated from the public consequences of his actions. The family wouldn't give him money, but they wouldn't let him tarnish them with a public trial either. They hadn't saved him. They had saved the name. Jack closed the laptop. The local police weren't just lazy. They were compromised. They wouldn't, or couldn't, touch a Baxter, even a dysfunctional one. The system wasn't just broken. It was actively working against them. His phone vibrated. He'd set an alarm for 0700. He called the Coastal Emergency Vet Clinic. The overnight update was grim but stable. Max made it through surgery, the vet tech said, her voice tired. The chest tube procedure was a success, but he's in a lot of pain. He's on a fentanyl drip and he's not responding well. He's an old boy. His system is weak. I understand, Jack said. He's a fighter. We're all hoping, she said, unconvincingly. Jack hung up and dialed Eleanor Vance's landline. He'd taken her home last night in a rideshare, staying just long enough to check the flimsy lock on her front door before leaving for his hotel. She picked up on the first ring as if she'd been sitting on the phone. Hello, her voice was a thin, terrified whisper. Eleanor, it's Jack Corbin. A shaky sigh of relief. Oh, Mr. Corbin. Good morning. Jack is fine. Just checking in. I'm all right. Just tired, she lied badly. A heavy silence filled the line. He's out, isn't he? She whispered. It wasn't a question. Yes, Jack said. Bail was posted last night. He heard a small sound, a choked sob she tried to stifle. I'm coming over, Eleanor. I want to look at your doors, your windows. We need a plan. Oh, no, you can't, she said, a new note of panic in her voice. You've done too much. I'll be fine. I was just about to call my insurance company about the van. Jack went still. Her voice, the hesitation. What's wrong with the van, Eleanor? Another pause. This time he heard her take a ragged breath. He came back, Jack, she whispered, and the familiarity with which she said his name was cracking. He came back. Sometime. In the night. He came back. 10 minutes later, Jack's rideshare pulled up in front of a small, neat bungalow in a historic neighborhood. It was a lovely house shaded by live oaks, but its vulnerability was palpable. A low porch, old windows. It was a soft target. He found her on the porch. She wasn't crying, she was sitting in her old manual wheelchair, her hands clenched on the armrests, staring at her own driveway with a look of such profound, quiet defeat that it hit Jack harder than any scream. In the driveway was a dark blue minivan, an older model, but clearly well maintained, with a high roof and a folded-up wheelchair ramp on the side. It was her lifeline, her connection to Max, to the grocery store, to the world. And it was destroyed. It wasn't a simple slashing. It was a violation. All 4 tires were flat, the rubber hacked and sawed it with a dull, serrated knife. It was the work of someone fueled by rage and impotence. But that wasn't the worst of it. Scratched crudely into the blue paint of the driver's side door, deep enough to show the white metal beneath, was one word: payback. Jack stood beside her, looking at the damage. He said nothing for a full minute. He took in the slashed tires, the carved word, the vulnerable house, the terrified woman. Kyle was free. He was broke. He was being hunted by loan sharks. And he had just been publicly protected and privately rejected by his father. He was a cornered animal, now even more desperate than he'd been at the bus station, and he was aiming all of that desperate, pathetic rage at the only target he had left. Jack looked at the word payback on the door. He turned to Eleanor. "He's not just trying to scare you," Jack said, his voice flat. "He's trying to immobilize you. He's cutting off your escape." Eleanor finally looked up at him, her face ashen. "What am I going to do, Jack?" "The police. They said it was a family matter." Jack looked back at the van. His mission parameters had just changed. The local system wasn't just compromised. It was useless. This was no longer about de-escalation. This was about security. "First," Jack said, his voice completely devoid of emotion, "you're going to call your insurance. Then, you're going to let me inside. We're changing your locks, and then we're establishing some new rules." Jack's first call wasn't to the police. The local system was a black hole of the Baxter family's influence. His first call was to a 24-hour locksmith. His second was to a car rental agency, for a simple, dark blue sedan. While the locksmith, a methodical man named Sal, replaced the flimsy old locks on Eleanor's bungalow with heavy-duty deadbolts, Jack took a rideshare back to his hotel, gathered his gear, and then went shopping. He avoided specialty spy shops, opting instead for a large sporting goods and electronics superstore. To the cashier, he was just another local, maybe a wildlife enthusiast or a homeowner fed up with raccoons. He bought 3 high-definition trail cameras, the kind hunters use, equipped with night vision and SD cards. He bought a digital audio recorder that came with a small adapter for a phone line. Lastly, he bought a set of wireless motion sensor chimes. He was building a network. Back at the bungalow, he worked with a quiet, efficient speed. Eleanor, exhausted and still in a state of shock, sat in her living room, ostensibly watching a morning news program, but seeing none of it. Jack installed the first camera outside, high in the dense foliage of a live oak, its lens centered on the driveway and the ruined van. The second was hidden in a hanging fern on the porch, invisible from the walkway, aimed at the new deadbolt. The third he placed inside, on a high bookshelf, covering the main living area and the front door. He attached the audio recorder to the landline jack in the kitchen. He set the motion chimes at the front and back doors. What is all that?" Eleanor asked, her voice weak. "The police won't help, Eleanor," Jack said, without a hint of harshness as he checked the feed from the porch camera on his laptop. "So we have to do their job. We need evidence. The district attorney's office couldn't ignore the kind of proof that bypassed the local precinct." While Eleanor rested, Jack turned to his other task. He sat at her kitchen table, laptop open. He was no longer a handyman. He was a hunter. He dove into the digital underbelly of the Allegheny Springs gambling scene. This was OSINT, open source intelligence. He scanned sports betting forums, searching for chatter about local loan sharks, and cross-referencing names. He was looking for the Mr. K. Baxter connection. He found a trail of digital breadcrumbs, whispers of a notoriously ruthless loan shark known only as Rico. He searched public records looking for known associates, and finally found a name connected to several shell corporations, Rico Gallo. He was a local businessman who specialized in maritime imports and, apparently, high-risk, high-interest loans to desperate clients. Kyle hadn't just made a bad bet. He'd made a deal with a predator. Jack now had the name of the other player. Late in the afternoon, Eleanor grew agitated. "Max," she whispered. I need to see him. I need to know. Is he really?" "I'll take you," Jack said. He helped her from the house into his rental sedan. The movement was slow, pained, and he was struck again by her fragility. He drove them to the Coastal Emergency Vet Clinic, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors, checking for any car that stayed behind them for more than 2 blocks. At the clinic, they were led to the back. Max was in a steel cage hooked up to an 4-tree and a monitor. He was shaved in patches, a tube protruding from his side. He looked small and old and impossibly broken. Eleanor made a sound, a choked sob, and wheeled herself forward. "Oh, Max, my sweet boy." The dog's ears twitched. His eyes, hazy with medication, opened. He couldn't lift his head, but his tail, his long, beautiful tail, gave a single, weak thump against the pad. It was a sign. "He's a fighter," Jack said, his voice quiet as he watched the old woman weep, her hands buried in the fur of her dog's neck. He felt a cold, hard knot of resolve tighten in his own chest. They returned home as dusk fell, the Allegheny Springs air growing thick and sticky. Jack made them a simple dinner. He was washing the dishes when the phone on the kitchen wall rang, its shrill cry cutting through the silence. Eleanor jumped. Jack put a hand on her shoulder. "Let the machine get it." The ringing stopped. A click. The answering machine whirred. And then Kyle's voice filled the room, not from the machine, but from Jack's digital recorder, which was now feeding the audio to his laptop speakers. The voice was at first unrecognizable, high and cracking with a desperate, whining energy. And Eleanor, pick up. I know you're there. You old. You have to pick up. They're calling me. They want the money tonight. They know where I am." The voice stopped, replaced by a ragged gasp. "You did this. This is your fault. You think that Soldier Boy can protect you? He's nothing." A crash sounded as if he'd hit something. "I'm going to get my money. You hear me? I'm coming back for it and you're going to be so sorry if you don't." The line went dead. Eleanor was white as a sheet. "He's coming," she whispered. "No," Jack said, saving the audio file. "He's just giving us the evidence we need." The culmination came 3 hours later. It was 11:30 p.m. Jack sat in the darkened living room, his laptop open. The house was silent. Eleanor was either asleep or pretending to be. Then, a soft electronic ding sounded from the motion sensor at the front door. Jack's eyes flicked to his laptop screen, which was now showing the live feed from the porch camera. A figure staggered into the frame, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the porch light and the infrared of the camera. It was Kyle. He was a wreck, his expensive shirt torn, his hair plastered to his head. He wasn't just lurking. He was on the porch, his back to the street. He looked around frantically, then launched himself at the new doorknob, rattling it with a crazed, impotent violence. "Aunt Eleanor," he cried, his voice a hoarse stage whisper. "Let me in. Please, I just need to talk. I just need, please." He pressed his sweaty face against the window, trying to peer inside. Jack sat unmoving in the darkness, watching the pathetic, desperate image of the man. He hit record on the video feed. He had it all now. The audio of the threats, the high-definition video of Kyle clearly agitated, returning to the scene, violating every reasonable definition of her space, his face perfectly captured. The web had been set, and the fly had been caught. Kyle Baxter stumbled off the porch, his panic greater than his rage, and vanished into the night. Jack Corbin remained motionless in the dark living room, his eyes on the laptop screen. He replayed the video, the desperate rattling of the doorknob, the face pressed against the glass, the raw, pathetic terror. He clicked save, naming the file evidence B20330 MP4. He unplugged the audio adapter from the wall jack and saved the threatening phone call file evidence of 2017. Wave. He had it. He had the complete, irrefutable story of escalation. Eleanor appeared in the hallway, a frail silhouette in a nightgown, her knuckles white on the frame of her walker. She used it inside the small house. "I heard him," she whispered, her voice so shaky it was barely audible. He was at the door." "He's gone," Jack said, his voice quiet but final as he closed the laptop. "He didn't get up. He didn't turn on a light. He won't be back tonight. He's scared. He just exposed himself and he knows it." "He's scared?" she asked, confused. "He was terrifying." "He was both?" Jack corrected. "And that made him careless. Go back to bed, Eleanor. I'll be here." She hesitated, then nodded, retreating into the shadows. Jack didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair listening to the house settle, his mind arranging the pieces. He was no longer a bodyguard. He was a strategist. This was a problem that couldn't be solved with a simple lock or a physical takedown. This was a systemic problem. The local police were compromised by the Baxter name. Kyle, protected by that name, felt insulated. But Kyle was also being hunted by a man named Rico Gallo. The situation was an unstable triangle. Jack's job was to apply pressure to the right points until the whole rotten structure collapsed on its weakest link. He spent the pre-dawn hours preparing his two levers. The first lever was legal, precise, and aimed at the one entity he believed the Baxters couldn't control, the district attorney. At 0700, sitting in his rental car down the street, he used his laptop and a public Wi-Fi hotspot to research the Chatham County District Attorney's office. He found her, D.A. Thompson. She was a new DA, 42, a former Pittsburgh prosecutor elected on a fiery, clean house anti-corruption platform. Her public statements were full of promises to break up the old boys network that had run Allegheny Springs for a century. In short, she was the perfect recipient. She was looking for a high-profile target to prove her point, and the Baxter family was the biggest target in the city. Jack created a new, clean folder on a clean thumb drive. He copied the video from the bus station sent by Chris, the witness, after Jack had given him a new, anonymous email address, the audio file of the phone threat, and the video of Kyle at the door last night. He added photos of the vandalized van, a copy of the initial police report showing the family matter dismissal, and a brief text-only file outlining Kyle's gambling debts and known associations, carefully scrubbing any trace of his own identity. He typed a cover letter, simple and direct. District Attorney Thompson. You ran on a platform of cleaning up Allegheny Springs. Here's your chance. The attached files contain evidence of an ongoing campaign of harassment, extortion, and animal cruelty, violent in nature, against an elderly, disabled woman by Kyle Baxter. The Allegheny Springs PD has been neutralized by the influence of his father, Augustus Baxter. This evidence is unequivocal. Witnesses are available. We are watching to see if your promises were real. A concerned citizen. He drove to an office supply store, printed the letter, and purchased a plain manila envelope and a thumb drive. He transferred the files. At 0900, he walked into the Chatham County Courthouse, a bustling place of lawyers and citizens. He was just another man in a collared shirt. He went to the DA's reception desk, to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Beth who looked both bored and stressed. This is for D.A. Thompson, Jack said, sliding the envelope across the counter. It's personal. Beth sighed, not even looking up. Just put it in the box. No, Jack said, his voice quiet but unyielding. Beth looked up, annoyed, and then her annoyance melted away. She saw his eyes. They were calm, steady, and carried an intensity that was deeply unnerving. This, Jack said, needs to go to her personally today. It is time sensitive. It's about the Baxter family. He saw the flicker of recognition at the name. He had her attention. He pushed the envelope the final inch. Just make sure she gets it. He turned and walked away. Without waiting for a reply. The first lever was pulled. Now for the second, the less legal one. The effective one. Jack drove to the other side of town, to a rundown commercial district. He found a corner store with a flickering neon sign. He went inside and bought a $20 prepaid burner phone with cash. He returned to the car, drove 2 blocks, and parked under a noisy highway overpass. The roar of trucks provided excellent ambient sound cover. He turned on the new phone, his fingers sure as he activated it. He had the number memorized from his research last night. He dialed. It rang twice. A voice answered, gravelly and thick. Yeah. It was Rico Gallo. He was a man who didn't bother with polite greetings. Jack didn't use his normal voice. He dropped it half an octave, let a low, rough edge creep in. The kind of voice that belonged on the Allegheny Springs docks. Just a friendly tip, Jack said, his words clipped. Your boy Kyle Baxter. A pause on the other end. Who's this? Gallo asked, his voice suddenly sharp, suspicious. Doesn't matter, Jack said. What matters is your money. Your boy just tried to shake down his old aunt for your cash and failed miserably. I heard it myself. He's broke. He's panicking. And he's talking about leaving town tonight. Skipping. Good luck getting your money if he's in Mexico. He was applying the perfect psychological pressure. The man who owes you money is about to run. Rico Gallo said nothing, but Jack heard an intake of breath, a sudden, sharp hiss. He'd found the nerve. Jack didn't wait for a reply. He ended the call. He immediately powered down the burner. He popped the back off, removed the SIM card, and snapped it in half with his thumb. He wiped the phone and battery down with his shirt. He got out of the car, walked to a storm drain, and dropped the SIM card pieces through the iron grate. He tossed the phone's body in one dumpster and the battery in another 2 blocks away. The entire operation, from purchase to destruction, had taken 15 minutes. He got back in his rental car and sat for a moment as a semi thundered overhead. The pincer movement was in place. He had just aimed 2 powerful, separate forces at Kyle Baxter. One, D.A. Thompson, was the slow, grinding, bureaucratic force of the law. The other, Rico Gallo, was the fast, brutal, and entirely illegal force of the underworld. Now, he just had to wait and see who got to Kyle first. The first lever moved at 9:05 a.m. In her downtown office, District Attorney Thompson was reviewing a case file, her mug of black coffee steaming beside her. Her receptionist, Beth, knocked and entered, holding a single manila envelope. D.A. Thompson, this just came in. The man who dropped it off, he was very specific. He said it was about the Baxter family. D.A. Thompson, a sharp, ambitious woman who had built her career taking down corrupt officials in Pittsburgh, looked up. Her interest was piqued. The Baxters were the untouchable third rail of Allegheny Springs politics. Thank you, Beth. Beth left and Thompson opened the envelope. No letterhead, just a single clean thumb drive and a note. A concerned citizen, she sighed, expecting a conspiracy theory. She plugged the drive into her personal laptop. The first file she clicked was Bus Station Assault MP4. She watched, her expression hardening from skepticism to cold fury. She saw Kyle's manic rage, the horrific moment he flipped the wheelchair, the brutal, sickening kicks to the old dog. The second file was evidence of 2017. Wave. She heard the high, cracking voice. This is your fault. You think that Soldier Boy can protect you? He's nothing. I'm going to get my money. The third was evidence B3-door MP4. She watched Kyle, eyes wild and desperate, rattling the doorknob, his face pressed against the glass. She closed the laptop. This wasn't a family matter. This was assault, animal cruelty, extortion, and the magic word that gave her jurisdiction, witness intimidation. The Baxters had just handed her the case she needed to break their power. She didn't call the Allegheny Springs police. She hit her intercom. Get Conan Cade and Riley in my office now. The second lever moved at 10:30 a.m. Kyle Baxter was hiding in a $12 an hour motel on the edge of town. The curtains were drawn, the air smelled of mildew and fear. He hadn't slept. He was waiting for his father to call, waiting for his lawyer to fix this. But the only calls he got were from the burner phone Rico Gallo had given him. He'd ignored it, and now someone was kicking his motel room door in. The cheapwood splintered, and 2 men stepped inside. They weren't police. They were large men who moved with a quiet, heavy purpose. Rico's disappointed, Kyle, the first man said, not bothering to introduce himself. He heard you were planning a trip without paying up. Kyle tried to stammer, to lie, but he couldn't get the air. The second man just grabbed him. It was fast, brutal, and methodical. They weren't trying to kill him. They were disciplining him. When they were done, Kyle was on the floor, his ribs screaming, his lips split. Rico's giving you 24 hours, the first man said, straightening his shirt. You don't leave town. You get his money, or we come back and finish it. They left. Kyle lay on the filthy carpet, sobbing, tasting blood. He was truly, utterly alone. The third knock on the door came at 11:15 a.m. Kyle screamed, scrambling into a corner. I don't have it, please. The door opened. This time with a key from the manager. 2 men in plainclothes stepped in, guns holstered, badges visible. The first was Investigator Kincaid, a tall, lean, older man with the weary, unshakable eyes of a career homicide detective. His partner, Riley, was younger, built like a linebacker. Kincaid looked at the trashed room, then at the bruised, bleeding Kyle. Kyle Baxter, looks like you've had a rough morning. Kyle stared, wild-eyed, confused. Police? Oh, thank God. You have to help me. These men, they tried to kill me. Kincaid's face didn't change. Get up. You have to call my father, Kyle said, trying to regain his arrogance as he staggered to his feet. Augustus Baxter, he'll sort this out. Your father's lawyer is welcome to meet you at your arraignment, Kincaid said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest, Mr. Baxter. Kyle's blood went cold. What? For what? It's a family matter. Not anymore, Kincaid said, cuffing him. The warrant was issued by the Office of District Attorney Thompson. The charges include aggravated assault on the elderly, felony animal cruelty, extortion, and witness intimidation. Your father can't touch this. Welcome to state's evidence, son. A day later, Jack Corbin sat in a lawyer's office paneled in polished wood. He and Eleanor were meeting with Mr. Gable, the attorney she'd mentioned. He was in his 70s, sharp as a tack, and exuded a calm, competent authority. Jack had provided him with his own clean file. It's done, Eleanor, Gable said, sliding a set of documents across his desk. D.A. Thompson is running with this. With the evidence from the concerned citizen and the public nature of the first assault, the charges are airtight. Augustus Baxter's lawyers can't make it go away. They've disavowed Kyle's actions. The family has cut ties. He's no longer their problem. And the others, Eleanor whispered. The men he owed. Ah, yes, Gable said, adjusting his glasses. I took the liberty of informing Mr. Gallo's legal counsel that his client, Mr. Baxter, was in custody, penniless, and facing a state-level prosecution with a very angry DA. In short, he's a bad investment. They have been assured you have no part in his debts. You're clear, Eleanor. Eleanor Vance signed the last document. It was a new will. It was a durable power of attorney. It was a wall of legally binding security around her. She was finally safe. Weeks later, the Allegheny Springs heat had finally broken. Jack Corbin stood on the porch of the bungalow. A new, shiny blue van was parked in the driveway, paid for in full by the insurance. He carried a single duffel bag. The door opened. Eleanor Vance was in her wheelchair, but she looked different. The color had returned to her face. Her eyes were bright. And at her feet, fur gleaming, head held high, was Max. The dog had made a full recovery, save for a few noble scars. He saw Jack, and his tail gave a single, solid, happy thump against the floorboards. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a guardian. You're leaving? Eleanor said, it wasn't a question. My leave is up, Jack replied, his voice quiet. He looked at Max, who trotted over, nudging his hand. Jack scratched the dog's ears, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. Eleanor wheeled herself closer, her hands clasped in her lap. My husband, she said, her voice clear and strong. He was in the Navy too, a long time ago. He was on the destroyers in the Atlantic. Jack looked up, meeting her eyes. He always told me, she continued, that real courage isn't in the fighting. It's doing the right thing when everyone else looks away. When it's easier to just keep walking, to not get involved. She reached out, her small, thin hand resting on his forearm. He would have been very proud of you, Jack. You're a good man. A knot formed in Jack's throat, a rare, unfamiliar pressure. He was a man of action, not of words. He didn't know how to respond to such pure, unadorned gratitude, so he didn't. He just placed his own hand over hers for a brief second. Take care of yourself, Eleanor. You too, Jack. He gave Max one last pat. He turned, walked down the steps, and didn't look back. The mission was complete.